The next step in the process, we want to go ahead and start to work with our raster data set here. And the raster data set is that gridded set of information that tells us land cover, what types of land cover exist here within the landscape. Again, if I turn on my stream layer again, you can start to look. And right here where I've got the mouse kind of in the center of the screen, you'll see this is where the river flows through, and on both sides we have forest land. Ultimately, that's what we're trying to identify, is where do we have an overlap between this 200-meter buffer and forest land cover underneath. Go ahead and turn those layers off real quick. We're just going to work here for a minute with this. In order to get the raster data to speak to the vector data, what we actually have to do is we have to turn it into a polygon. The reason being is that raster data needs to speak to raster data, and vector data speaks to vector data. It's just how these different types of data are used within GIS. And so in order to do that, what the instructions tell you to do is they first say go ahead and open up your attribute table. And what you're going to find is that while these are labeled out here cover type as row crop, fixed agriculture, grassland, the forest and shrubland layer, what I want you to do is look at that. The value of that is actually 4. And so that's a numerical classification for everything that's in that forest and shrubland land cover data set. And that's an important step in the process, because what we're going to do next is we're actually going to go ahead and use a spatial analyst tool. Well, so the spatial analyst tools don't exist up here in our analysis toolbox. They actually exist down here underneath spatial analyst tools. But before we can use them, what we've got to do is we've got to go turn on the extension. You got to click to turn on your spatial analyst. Mine's actually already on here. And so what you're doing there is you've probably just spent a couple $1,000s to give you access to this additional extension to the Esri software. But all of your ability to analyze these large raster data sets, and raster data is, especially for environmental management, is probably where the majority of data is stored at within GIS. But in order to be able to work with that, we actually have to use these spatial analyst tools. So the first one we're going to use here is we're going to go underneath extraction. And underneath here, we're going to go extract by attributes. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just drag in and drop our raster in. And here in a second, it's going to bring this up, and I'm going to go ahead and tell that this, I want to be land cover. I'm just going to call it forest. See how it likes that. It's gonna, if you put a really long name, I think it's longer than eight characters, you're gonna get a red X here, and you're gonna ask me why. It's because rasters have to be labeled with a very short name. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to double click on value, I'm going to click equals, and I can click get unique values, and I remember from what I just looked up that I want forest and shrubland, which is all 4. That should be everything I need there, and I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Let that go ahead and run, and you're going to see that suddenly a new layer popped up. And that new layer has some direct overlaps with information I had below it. And I can go ahead and turn this back on. I'm going to go ahead and color this correctly just to work cleanly. Again, maybe even something a little bit darker. All right, so this is now all the forest land inside of the Plover River watershed. And you can see there's quite a bit, especially as you go towards the north. And again, I can zoom back in here, and I can drop in streams layer. I can turn the buffer on at this point in time. But what I have sitting in front of me is still it's still a raster data set, meaning it's still a gridded image format. What I need to do before I can work with this is that I need to convert this from a raster to a polygon. And so we're going to use a set of tools. I'll go ahead and close up my spatial analyst toolbox for now. And I'm going to go from raster to polygon. And what I'm going to do here is I'll just go ahead and drag in that new layer I just created. And it looks like we're good. I want it set to value. I need to tell it where I want it to save. I'm going to call this forest poly. I think that that's good. Now, one of the things that isn't in the instructions here that you should probably take note of is that where it says simplify polygons, and it says as optional, go ahead and turn that off. And that's a really important step. I'll show you in a minute why. So what this is doing is it's taking and it's converting everything that I just showed you in that grid. Right, now it's gone ahead and changed it over. If I go ahead and just turn down the green, you can see it's now a polygon representation. When I mean polygon, before I had individual grid cells. And where I had that before, oops, I'm going to go ahead and grab my forest poly. You can see that every one of those that's a connected polygon all comes up as one entire feature. Alright, that's really kind of the next step in the process there. I'll go ahead and stop at this point and drop back in. But before I go, I want to show you what happens if we leave that simplify polygons layer on. And so here's what happens if we leave simplify polygon layer on. I'm just going to let that go off into the ether. Let that run for a second, and you're going to see that what pops up on this doesn't look like the grid that we were just working with. Instead, what we're going to get out of this is that it is going to go in and try and artificially create simplified, larger block shapes. And what that looks like here in practice is let it go ahead and pull up. I'll zoom in here so you can see. Basically what it does is it turns everything into triangles, right? So that's not going to work for us. You need to make sure we go ahead and get that out of there. All right, we'll go ahead and pick up on the next video.